I worked as a security guard at a large hotel in Las Vegas during my late 20s. It paid way better than pretty much any other job nearby that I was actually qualified for, but the most annoying part about it was the scheduling and the staff. At the time, the building was having trouble with a lack of staff to cover shifts, so my schedule would be mornings, evenings, or overnights, all randomly throughout the week. It made it really hard to even sleep sometimes, but again, I liked the money. Anyways, I was working a late evening shift this night and was at the front desk talking to two of my coworkers. It was around 11, and my shift ended at 12, so we were just passing the time. In the middle of our conversation, the phone rang on the desk that I was leaning on. Checking the number, it was from one of the rooms in the hotel, so I picked it up and asked how I could help them. A man spoke, saying that there was something going on in one of the rooms down the hall and that he was really worried about it. I asked him what he meant, and he frantically responded, telling me to come up quick because he was getting really nervous. I checked the room number on the phone, then told him I would send security up as soon as possible. Of course, though, I was just referring to myself. When I put the phone down, I quickly explained the strange nature of the call to my coworkers, then headed to the elevators and went to the mid-level floor where the caller's room was located. Walking down the hallway, there was a strange sense of absolute silence. I expected to hear whatever the caller was talking about, but there were no loud noises coming from anywhere on the floor. I also kind of expected the caller to have been standing by their door waiting for me or something, but the door was closed. I knocked on the door, loudly announcing that it was hotel security. I didn't hear any movement or sounds coming from the room at all, and after a minute of no answer, I walked down to the end of the hallway, listening intently for anything unusual, then continued back to the door, knocking again. A few moments later though, the room behind me opened their door and an older woman asked if I was security. I said yes and asked if they knew anything about a strange noise or the caller from the room, to which they replied that they had heard loud noises traveling through the hallway a few minutes ago, but were unsure what it was. From their voice and facial expressions, they seemed really terrified. At this point, I was already starting to get really nervous, but things only got stranger. I grabbed my walkie and radioed down to the front desk, asking them to call the room again and let me know if they answered. After a little bit, they replied that nobody answered. I stood there for a moment, trying to think of what to do, before radioing back down to them. I told them to check who was staying in the room. After waiting for what felt like forever, they finally got back to me, saying that nobody had the room booked for tonight. Even more confused, I took out my security keycard and opened the door since nobody was supposed to be there. The room looked clean and unused as far as I could tell. I searched every corner and found basically nothing, but then I walked over to the phone. I turned it over and got the serial number on it. Then I went back down to the lobby where my desk was, and I checked the security records for timestamps of calls that had been made from that room. Sure enough, there was a record of an active call having been made from this room to the front desk, the one that I had answered about 15 minutes ago. Obviously, the hotel didn't record the calls or anything, so all I was able to confirm was that someone was in that vacant room without permission. This ended up becoming a bigger investigation over the coming days, as the next morning, one of the guests staying in a room on that same floor was reported missing by a family member that was staying in a separate room. The security footage of all the entrances and exits were reviewed, and the missing person was last seen leaving the hotel alone a couple hours prior to the call that I had received. It's still unclear if the two incidents were connected or not, but it's definitely a really strange situation. I don't know how the caller got access to that phone, or who they were, but personally I believe that the reason they called seemed to add up with someone getting forcefully kidnapped based on their brief description. The person behind the mystery call was never identified, and as of right now, the missing person still has not been found. This happened to me during a business trip that I took last year for work. I arrived at the hotel and picked up my key to the room, which my company had paid for. It was a nice looking hotel on the inside, though a bit smaller than most other hotels. There were maybe 30 to 40 rooms total, and only 3 stories. My room was on the top floor, so I took the elevator up and started making my way down the hallway. I put my bags down by the door and reached into my pocket for the room key. But just as I did that, the neighboring room's door opens and a man steps into the hall. He greeted me, mentioning that he was my neighbor and held his hand out, gesturing for a handshake. I confusingly shook it and told him my name, then started making my way into the room. As I walked in, I noticed that he went back into his room as well and shut the door. I thought it was strange that someone would come out of their temporary hotel room just to greet me as their temporary neighbor, but some people are just like that, I guess. I unpacked my small suitcase and duffel bag, then laid on the bed and turned on the TV. It was pretty late already, and I was tired from the flight, so I planned on going to bed early that night. I took a quick shower, then turned off all the lights. I laid there, trying to sleep for almost 20 minutes, before hearing the neighbor's door creak open, followed by seeing their shadow walk by my door, but they stopped just before they passed my room. Through the sliver of light under the door, I could see their shadow get closer for a second, before backing away and continuing down the hall. This obviously creeped me out, so I got up and made sure that all the locks were secured on the door, then went back to bed. The next day, I went to meet my coworkers at a company-owned building where we attended a presentation and had dinner. I didn't get back to the hotel until 10 p.m., and I was really exhausted. I tossed my work bag on the bed and then got in the shower. I was in there for maybe 10 minutes, when through the water splashing, I heard the distinct beep sound of the electronic door lock unlocking. I knew it was too late for it to be the cleaning services, so my mind instantly jumped to the strange man staying in the room next to mine, but I didn't know how he could possibly have a key card that could unlock my door. Not knowing what to do, I stood there silently as I listened to the door slowly open and then close, followed by footsteps walking past the bathroom door. With the shower running, I knew that they had to know that I was in there, which terrified me even more. I tried to quietly step out of the shower as to not alarm them. Then I quietly put on a pair of pants that I had laying on the ground. Making sure to lock it, I leaned my ear up against the bathroom door and listened. I could hear a faint noise, sounding like someone was searching through one of my bags. Of course I wanted to confront them, but for all I knew, they could have a gun or a knife. In the moment, I really just felt helpless and frozen in fear. I had no idea what this guy could want from me, but soon the room went silent. While I didn't have my phone with me, I figured my best bet was to call for help. At the very least, it would hopefully get the guy to run away. I took a deep breath, then started banging on the bathroom door, yelling for help as loud as I could. I could hear the man's frantic footsteps run past the door and back into the hallway. I quickly got out and closed the front door, locking it shut, then ran to the nightstand to get my phone and dialed 911 with my shaky hands. Once they were on their way, I called the front desk to let them know as well. Of course, by the time they got here, the man was already gone, but thankfully the police found him in his car a few hours later. I'm not sure if he even got any jail time for his actions though, because they couldn't prove his motive to be harmful. I honestly think he was trying to kidnap me or something though, as I don't know any other reason why he would go into the room when he knew that I was in there, but I guess we'll never know for sure what would have happened. My family would take yearly vacations to a different hotel and resort every summer. It would always be me, my wife, and my 2 little boys. For the most part, we would spend all of our time at the resort rather than going out and visiting other places. It made it cheaper since we didn't need to rent a car, and it was just relaxing to stay at a nice place and get away from everyday life. Of course, when we first arrived in the morning, we all unpacked and the kids immediately wanted to go to the water park. My wife and I sat on the chairs around the pool, while the boys went off and played with the other kids at the water park that was right next to the pool. We sat there enjoying the sun for about 2 hours before we both decided we should get back to our room so we could get ready to go out for dinner. I got up and began walking around the water park looking for the boys, and after a few minutes I was able to find Sam, the older of the two, and asked him where Alan was. I changed both of their names for privacy reasons. Sam said that Alan was playing with another kid on the other side of the park. I told Sam we were leaving and to run back to Mom while I went to find Alan. I was searching, walking around like an idiot for probably 10 minutes, starting to get nervous when I finally saw him. He was in the back corner where a few chairs were set up and was talking to a small boy that looked about his age. Sitting in the chairs next to him was a couple, seeming to be the boy's parents. I walked up and briefly introduced myself, but they didn't respond, aside from giving me a slight smile. There was an awkward couple seconds of silence, then I told Alan that we were leaving for dinner and led him back to the hotel. I asked him about who his new friend was, and he said he was playing with him at the water park, but that was pretty much it. Alan was a pretty talkative kid, so it was nothing out of the ordinary, but then he told me something strange. He said that the boy introduced him to his parents, who then invited him for dinner tonight. I found it really strange that someone would invite a young boy to dinner without even talking to the boy's parents. I told my wife as soon as we got up to the room, and she was also really worried about it. We ended up going somewhere quick for dinner, and got back to the hotel around 5. The kids both seemed pretty exhausted, so we were ready to just relax for the rest of the night. We got in the elevator and made our way up to our floor. But as the elevator doors opened, Alan's new friend and his mother were standing there as if they were waiting for the elevator to go down. As soon as we got out, the mother looked at me with a short smile and asked if Alan could join them for dinner tonight. I briefly looked at my wife, who seemed just as confused and concerned as I was. Then I looked back at the lady. "We already had dinner tonight, but maybe we can work something out for tomorrow." Her smile faded as she turned and walked down the opposite hallway, I assumed to their room. I knew both me and my wife thought the same thing, that they were creepily waiting for us by the elevator the whole time just to ask about dinner. When we got inside our room, we pulled Alan aside and strictly told him to not go near that family without one of us with him. He seemed a bit upset about it, but he agreed. I also pulled Sam aside separately and made sure he knew of the situation and that I wanted him to look after his little brother if ever we weren't around. We all took turns showering, then relaxed on the bed and couch for the rest of the night. I was pretty annoyed at how the vacation was going already, having to be stressed out for my child's safety, but I assured myself it would be better tomorrow. Eventually, we all got ready for bed and turned out the lights. There were 2 beds in the room, one that my wife and I slept on, and the other for the 2 boys to share. A few hours into the night, I was shaken awake. I jolted up, as I guess I was pretty on edge, and I saw Sam next to me, still shaking my arm. "You okay, bud?" Sam responded quietly, whispering to me that Alan was talking to someone at the door. I immediately jumped out of bed and turned the corner leading to the front door. From the short glimpse I got before yelling at him, I could tell he was in the process of figuring out how to unlock the door, and I could hear a faint voice on the other side. I sprinted towards him, screaming for him to back away from the door. Alan jumped back, frightened by the volume of my voice. I slammed against the door, hearing footsteps sprinting down the hall as I finished unlocking the door and swung it open. I know I should have just stayed in the room and called for help, but I was in such a rage that all I wanted was to confront the creep. Entering the hallway, I saw a quick figure of a man turn the corner down the hall towards the elevators. I tried to catch up, but once I turned the corner, there was no sight of him. He wouldn't have had time to take the elevator, so I knew he was staying in a room on that floor. After looking around for a few minutes, I ran back to our room and met my wife, who was already awake due to the chaos of the situation. I told her to lock the door, as I was going to go to the front desk to inform them of the incident. By the time I got down to the lobby, my adrenaline was starting to fade out and I was trying to calm myself down so I could explain what happened. There was a young woman at the counter that I talked to, and I could tell she had never dealt with a situation like this. She called a security guard over to talk to me, as well as her manager. After a few minutes of discussion though, it was pretty clear that they couldn't do much about it. They had no security cameras in the hallways, only on the entrances and exits. I didn't have any proof nor description of the man at the door, or his relation to the parents who asked about dinner. Obviously I assumed it was the father of the other boy, but even though I felt like I knew for sure the intention of the creepy parents, I couldn't really prove it. In short, the best they could do was give a refund for the remaining days, so we had to move to a different resort 30 minutes away. It's a really terrible feeling as a parent to know that there was someone likely trying to kidnap your child, and yet there is nothing anyone can do about it. I hate knowing that those creepy parents are probably out somewhere right now trying to get unknowing children into some weird trap of theirs. Those people deserve to rot in prison, and I hope that me sharing this experience can inform other parents of the true dangers, and hopefully help save their children from these horrible people. What freaks me out the most is the possibility of the boy that was with them being someone else's missing child, who they now use to lure in other innocent children. I'm an older guy in my late 40s, and for work, I'm part of a team that travels across the country to train employees at our company. The company pays for our travels and hotels, and while sometimes it does somewhat feel like a vacation, usually it doesn't. When traveling, we have to work long hours and basically spend the entire day in the office, leaving us just enough time to sleep at the hotel before waking up and going back to work. I was on one of these work trips and had been at a hotel for a few days. It was a Saturday night when I got out of work and got back to the hotel a little past 10. I walked inside and got in the elevator. The whole hotel was quiet. There wasn't anyone walking around in the lobby and nobody in the elevator. When I got to my floor, I stepped out and began walking down the hallway, but at the end was a person. They were standing right in front of my door, or at least it looked like it, but I was too far to tell for sure. As I approached, the guy noticed me and walked away, going inside a room a few doors down. I got to my door and went in, wondering what he possibly could have been doing. I was sure he was either outside my room or the room next to mine, but I figured it had to be the other room. I forgot about it after a couple minutes and took a shower, then got in bed. I had another long day of work tomorrow, so I wasn't trying to overthink anything right before bed. I fell asleep, but woke up multiple times throughout the night, hearing someone walking outside my room. I even thought I heard them knocking once, but I wasn't sure if it was in my dream or if it was real. I got up in the morning, still tired, and went to work. I didn't get back to the hotel until late, I think around 9, but at least it was earlier than the previous night. When I walked up to my room, no one was in the hallway this time. I tossed my work bag on the couch and got in bed, but decided to watch some TV before sleeping. I reached for the remote on the nightstand and turned on some random show. I don't remember dozing off, but I must have really quickly because I woke up just before 10 to the sound of my phone ringing. I looked over at the nightstand, but as I gained more consciousness, I realized the sound wasn't coming from next to me, and my phone wasn't even on. I snapped my head toward the closet next to the TV, and then the ringing was suddenly silenced. A cold chill ran through my body as I saw the slight movement of a shadow from the crack between the closet doors. I jumped out of bed full of adrenaline and ran out of the room, going straight to the stairs and running to the front desk. They called for security, who came a few minutes later and went into the room to search, and after 30 seconds, they came out holding a man, the same man I'd seen in the hallway before. I couldn't believe he didn't try to run away, but they said he was still in the closet. As far as I know, the guy had no idea who I was or anything, and didn't give any specific reasons as to why he broke into my room and hid in the closet. Knowing he was sitting in the closet at the end of the bed, probably watching me through the cracks, makes my body shake. I guess he was just crazy, but it terrifies me to think about what could have happened if his phone didn't ring. I lived in a small town in the mountains just outside of Salt Lake City for several years in my early 20s. During my time living there, I took up a job at the local hotel. I say the local hotel because it was the only hotel in the whole town. It was very small and family owned, so nothing nice or well established. Almost nobody visited the town aside from seeing friends or family because there was no other reason to be there. Anyway, this happened when I was 23 and working the overnight shift at this hotel. Since it was so small, having 12 rooms total, I was the only worker there during the night. I was sitting in the lounge room, which was just off to the side of the main entrance, when I saw the headlights of a car shine through the window as they pulled into the parking lot. I put my phone away and got up, not expecting anyone to check in tonight. I stood behind the front desk, waiting for them to come in. After a couple minutes, I was getting impatient and went back on my phone. Probably 30 minutes went by before someone finally walked through the doors. It was a man, looking around the same age as me, but he looked really tired. I welcomed him in.
"Looks like you've had a long day of driving,"
I said, trying to start up some small talk, but he didn't respond. He pulled out his wallet and took out cash.
"1 room, just for the night,"
he said. I got him to sign in on the sheet and gave him the key to room 4, which was down the hall on the first floor. The man went straight to the room, bringing nothing but the small backpack he had with him. There was nobody else staying that night, so it was just me and him in the building. I knew he was probably just passing through and was tired from driving, but his attitude gave me an uncomfortable sense. Not to be creepy or anything, but I looked at the sign-in sheet he filled out and noticed he didn't put a last name, only an initial. His first name was Daniel, too, so it was about as generic as it could be. The hotel has never needed these sheets before, though, so having them filled out was pretty much pointless. I went back to the lounge and sat down, putting headphones in and watching a movie I had downloaded on my phone. About an hour in, something caught my attention. A muted thump came from down the hall, making the floor vibrate under me, like something had shaken the building. I took one earbud out, and just a second later, another thump came. I stood up and walked quickly to the end of the hall, seeing nothing. I knew it had to be the man, and my first thought was that maybe he had knocked something over or broken something by accident. I walked up to his door and knocked.
Sir, are you okay?
I called out, but there was no reply. I waited another few seconds, then leaned my head closer and listened more carefully, hearing faint breathing from the other side of the door. He was standing there, trying to be quiet. It really creeped me out, so I backed away and went to the front desk, staying more aware for the next little while. The rest of the night went by without sound or issue, but in the morning when checkout time came, he never came up to the front desk. There really wasn't any rush, so I let him have an extra hour before I began wondering if he'd even planned to leave. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. Eventually, I got the spare key and unlocked the door, but it still wouldn't open. It would barely even budge, and I ended up having to call the owners. When we finally managed to force the door open, we found that the room's dresser was pushed in front of the door to keep us out. What we didn't find was the man. He wasn't in the room, but I never saw him leave the hotel through the only entrance and exit. His car was still in the parking lot too, which made it all the more confusing. We looked around the room some more, but didn't find anything else strange aside from the dresser that he used as a barricade. I think I actually would have been less creeped out if we found other strange things, but seeing everything else look normal just gave me chills. We never found out who the man was, where he went, or what he was doing at the hotel. Last year, I went on a long 10-day road trip. It wasn't to any single place, I just drove in a big loop, stopping at 5 or 6 different cities. I actually didn't book any hotels in advance because I wasn't sure exactly how long I would spend in each city, or where I would want to take breaks during the drive, so I was relying on hotels allowing walk-ins. The first 5 nights, I was able to find decent hotels on the course of my drives, but the 6th night, I ran into some issues. I was driving between cities and felt my eyes getting heavy around 11 p.m. I wanted to keep going and get to the next major city and then sleep in a parking lot or something, but there was no way I could make it when I was so sleepy already. I pulled over and contacted a few big-name hotels that were on the way, but none of them were accepting walk-ins at the time. I was getting nervous, thinking I might have to park on the side of the road and sleep, which was obviously dangerous, but then I saw a sign for a hotel 10 miles ahead. I drove until I reached the building, then parked by the front. The hotel was small, looking more like a motel, being a single story with a bunch of rooms. There were a few other cars in the parking lot, but it was mostly empty. I got out and went up to the reception desk, asking the woman there if I could have a room. Luckily they had one available, and she gave me a key card. I got my bag from the car and brought it to the room. It was really outdated, but for the price, it wasn't all that bad. But only a minute after I went inside, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it a crack, just to see who it was. There was a man mumbling something to himself, and right when he saw the door open, he pushed into it, trying to force himself into the room while still talking to himself. I put my arm out and stopped him, preventing the man from fully entering. He stopped talking and looked up at me as I told him to leave. After a second, he turned around and walked away. I made sure he actually left, then locked the door. It was really weird, but I didn't feel too threatened because I was sure it was just some crackhead who was lost. I stayed up another 15 minutes, then fell asleep. A couple hours into the night, I woke up to a knock on the door. I was immediately irritated, knowing it had to be that man from earlier. Having learned my lesson, I put the chain bolt on the door before cracking it open. It was a good thing I did, because the second I unlocked the door, the man rammed into it. He started yelling random sentences that made no sense. I backed up right away and called 911. The man didn't let up though. He continued slamming into the door, trying to break in. A minute into the chaos, the man shoved a knife between the door and tried cutting the chain. There was no way it could cut it, but it definitely horrified me to know that he had a knife with him. The yelling, banging, and cutting went on for several minutes before it went quiet. Police showed up a while later, but the man was gone. I don't know what was wrong with him, or why he wanted to get inside my room so bad, but he definitely had some bad intentions. It may have just been because he was drugged up, but breaking into someone's room with a knife is horrifying. All it takes is one wrong move, like answering a door or leaving it unlocked, for someone like him to take advantage. I don't think he had something against me personally, but I still have this feeling sometimes, like I'm being watched.